Well, go bother your local schools and tell them.
Right, and tell them
it's
Kate
important.
sent you.
Tell them Kate sent you.
Is that okay, Sarah?
I couldn't agree. Actually, I really couldn't agree with you more. I think it's absolutely, it gets back to that. I mean, principals are the leaders of these schools. So pushing them, encouraging them, flooding them with data and good information about why this matters is, I think, very powerful.
Well, what we're touching on is really the lack of an advocacy agenda. We don't have consensus. We've got food groups that argue between themselves. I'm organic, you're local, we can't talk. Then we have others who are worried about nutrition issues, and they can't talk with the organics because really any food would be better than none. So we've got a splintered community, and I really go back to what we've accomplished in Chicago over my tenure in grant making. You know, we got communities organized to rally around housing and local economic development. We got the Latino community to ignore national boundaries and create a consensus agenda on behalf of Latinos. We have worked in many ways to figure out how to build a constituency for the arts, for other subsectors of our culture and our population. How is it that we can't organize around this topic? Certainly the Food Depository has been brilliant at raising visibility. I do think it's awareness first, education second, and then the question is action. It doesn't take another study. It takes action. And we don't have enough actors to implement the solutions that are really within our grasp. Universal breakfast in the classroom is free. It's here. We know how to do it. It's just not being done everywhere or as many places as we could get it implemented. The other issues, the opportunities that the Food Depository has created in other neighborhoods, why is it that there are only 3 pantries in schools? Every school should have one because guess what? It's an easy place to distribute food, and if the system is worried about how do I get a parent into the school building, I bet that bait could help. But the system has to understand the connection between food distribution and educational outcomes. Because if you think you're only about education and not about hunger remediation, then you're not going to let the pantry into the building for mutual benefit. But we have to have an action plan, and we have to get the actors organized.
So as we're hearing, the resources, the services are not distributed universally or evenly. The need is also not distributed universally or evenly. This study that you mentioned, Kate, sheds a lot of light locally in Chicago and suburban Cook County about where those populations that need the services are versus what services are available. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what some of the critically underserved areas are, what unites them, what characteristics they share, and what could be done to make a more equitable distribution of those services.
Well, I think there are a couple of issues. There are times of the day and the week and the year where children just simply don't have adequate access to food. Summer is a significant one. There are all of these children who are getting breakfast, more of them getting lunch, but when the school year ends at in the 3rd week of June, so does that consistent quality meal that they're getting in school. And we need to fight to make sure that children have access to food every month of the year. I think there's also one of the things that I want to make sure doesn't get lost in this conversation. We've spent a lot of time talking about people who live at or below the poverty line. But a really significant challenge that we're seeing right now is that there are literally tens of thousands of people who live above that poverty line, who may not qualify for some of the programs that we're talking about, and yet that, for the Food Depository, is one of the largest sections of people we serve. So as a reminder, that poverty line, if you are a family of 4 living in the city of Chicago, it's $22,050. Okay, $22,000 in the city of Chicago for the 4 of you. If you're making, say, $36,000, you're not a poverty statistic. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to think about how do we reach families that may not qualify for some of those federal programs that are the front line of defense. And that's where a charitable food distribution system, community pantries, after-school programs that provide a meal are the safety net. But for so many people, particularly in the last 3 years, they have found themselves in this situation without having any idea how to access that safety net, which is why education and awareness raising is so critical. I see the folks from the food pantry in Oak Park sitting over there. They've had a significant increase in the number of people turning to them, people who never expected to have to need to walk into a pantry. So we need to educate people about where they can go and what that support looks like.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, particularly a lot of our data stops at 2008, or if we're lucky, 2009. As we all know, things have changed rapidly in the last couple of years. The organizations you represent are very much on the front lines of this, and I wonder what you're seeing in terms of some of these new families who have never been accustomed to accessing the safety net, a safety net that is very much in a lot of cases geared toward the very poor. How do you reach out to those people? What kinds of interventions are effective with these people who are newly in need, particularly in the last couple of years?
Well, I think that is an enormous challenge, and again, many of these people don't actually know how to reach some of our existing services like WIC or food stamps, and don't have opportunities to follow some of the existing channels. One of the challenges that is working with the community-based providers in this state who are closest to the families and closest to help, and are themselves struggling because of the funding crisis in the state. And what we have certainly seen is that access to whether it's home visiting or any of the other community-based programs that start really with potentially a guidance counselor in a high school reaching out to a community-based program and informing them of a pregnant teen who's recently homeless or some other situation like that, that we are that our lines of defense are pretty frayed.
Yeah, and Sarah, I wonder if you, I mean, how is this playing out in the schools? Are you seeing, I mean, are school nurses beginning to see evidence that you know, more kids or different populations of kids are beginning to experience food insecurity or other kinds of economic stressors? Are teachers beginning to see this and relating it back to you? How is that leading edge of this economic crisis playing out in those schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that teachers and principals, and we hear from in some ways from principals more than teachers, but when I am out in schools, you know, we hear a tremendous amount of information coming back to us about just how much harder it is getting to keep doing the basics, and in some cases, you know, the basics only get us so far to begin with. You know, school-based personnel are very focused on trying to fill in these gaps. Again, innovative principals are figuring out ways to help mediate some of these issues. Obviously, our budget situation was terrible this year. It is not looking any better next year, and the state's finances are also not in good shape. So I think what exacerbates those very local challenges is this cloud of uncertainty as well about what's going to come down the future. What does next year look like? And of course, it doesn't sound like there's any real good news on the economic front coming out of Washington or Springfield. So, nor does it sound like there's any particular groundswell about to happen even in the next year or two. So I think morale and kind of just the general sense back for these students back at home as well as in the classroom and in the schools is a huge issue for us, and one that I don't know we have any really particularly great answer for, but will continue to be exacerbated, I'm sure.
I'll just tack on. I already told all of you to go and you know, write letters and challenge the principals in the communities that you live. I would also say all of you hopefully are voters and our leaders, whether they are the leaders in our local community at the state level or the national level, need to understand that this is a priority. It's absurd that every one of us at some level is having to beg for the resources to make sure that we can provide an adequate level of services for the people who are in most dire need. And again, I ask the question, where is the outrage, right? Where is the outrage that we have to fight to make sure that there are adequate resources for children who are under the age of 5, or adequate resources for our schools? We are the people who will change that, but we really need to be engaged and challenge our leaders to do what's right.